What's going on, guys? Dan from SSG bringing you another Edison format deck profile. This time I'm profiling my Miraculous Descent Fairy deck. It's a pretty sweet deck that tries to summon Archlord Kristya as fast as possible, so we're going to get right into it. We have the full 3 copies of Archlord Kristya, of course. We want to get this card banished as fast as possible, and we want to return it into play with our Miraculous Descent, special summon a fairy monster from the banished pile, and we can chain it. It's chainable, so we want to put this into play at instant speed, chaining to a card like Book of Life, or a card like Emergency Teleport, and just completely blow our opponent out of the water. So we want full access to all 3 copies of Kristya. You want to get it in the grave, get it banished, and summon it back into play. Of course, we have 3 copies of Herald of Orange Light. Card's extremely powerful. It helps get Kristya in the graveyard so that we can reanimate it, but also it's going to interact with our opponent in very meaningful ways. Of course, keeping our recruiters in play by destroying those Caius effects, not letting those cards resolve, and just really interacting in the specific points that we want to be interacting at. For recruiters, we have 3 copies of Shining Angel, 2 copies of Nova Summoner. We're still playing the recruiters here because we still are a normal fairy deck. We can still grind our opponent out and just be a normal fairy deck. And I do like the 3 Nova Summoners generally, but there's a lot of starters in this deck. There's a lot of normal summons, so I elected to cut down the Nova Summoner, as some of our turn 1 plays are a little bit better than the normal Summoner. So, but we still have all 5, because if we do have a Kristya in hand early game, these cards can cycle through our opponent's monsters, just sacrificing themselves to the graveyard, and then drop the Kristya really early as well, naturally. So we have all 5 recruiters there. I do like those quite a bit. Then we have 3 copies of DD Warrior Lady. This card is just incredible. I mean, this card is unbelievable in this format. It's one of the best reasons to be playing fairies, and it's just really good against the metagame. Just one of the strongest removal cards in the format. You want to have access to this, and Shining Angel is most likely going to grab you this card and be awesome removal for you. All 3 copies of DD Warrior Lady. I'm electing to play all 3 copies of Ryko. Now, a lot of fairy decks shaving down on Ryko, and I do generally agree with it, but not in this list, because we want to get a fast access to Kristya any way possible, and milling it randomly into the graveyard is one of the ways we want to be doing that. So I like the 3 copies of Ryko, as it's a removal spell, right? We're going to set it and then kill our opponent's monsters, but we're also going to mill fairies in the grave, hopefully hit a Kristya so that we can banish it and return it into play with a Miraculous Descent. So 3 copies of Ryko here. We have 3 copies of Dimensional Alchemist. A lot of synergy with the Miraculous Descent, as we are going to be able to banish fairies off the top of our deck, so that we can return them into play. But also, it is going to act as a pseudo Sangan or Card Trooper. If our opponent Dust Tornadoes our face down Miraculous Descent, we can chain, bring this into play from our banished pile, and then we end up getting a +1 off that. Since it's destroyed, we're going to be able to add a fairy back as well. So a lot of good synergy in this deck, but also just a fantastic card in any fairy deck. So we're going to have all 3 copies of Dimensional Alchemist. Of course, we have 2 copies of Honest. We're going to play Honest in any fairy deck. Card's very powerful. We have 2 copies of Freed. Now, we do have to go up a little bit on the banishing cards, because we want to banish our fairies, most likely Kristya, out of the graveyard, so we can return it into play with the Miraculous Descent out of the banished pile. So 2 copies of Freed, just solid removal. It's just going to remove our fairies and also do something productive. The same thing goes for 2 copies of Soul of Purity and Light. It's just a good pressure card. It's going to be able to combo well with the Miraculous Descent. If we remove a Kristya to summon this card and then reborn it with Miraculous Descent, it's a really, really difficult board state for your opponent to come back from. 2000 Beast Stick plus the Kristya next to it is unbelievable, and this card just helps provide fast Kristyas and also just provides aggressive game plans, so I do like this quite a bit. Now, I have 1 copy of Cyber Valley. This is a tech I stole from Pro Storm's most recent win, the RBT Ruler series. Card's really good. I think it's good. You know, I kind of messed around with it in the past, but after looking at his list, I kind of could tell that this card is it should be a mainstay in fairies, as it gives you a lot of different options. And Cyber Valley is just a good fetchable card whenever you feel like you need it. It just ends the battle phase, but also has some other unique effects that do come up quite a bit. And Cyber Valley really strong. We want to have access to it, and playing 4 copies of a card like this off of the Shining Angels or even the Nova Summoners linking into the Shining Angels to have access to this card is just really strong. And the price you pay for putting 1 card in your deck, having access to it at all time is just very powerful. So we're going to play the 1 Cyber Valley. Of course, we have the one copy of Gorz, really strong, main line of defense. And then we have one copy of Card Trooper, similar to the Rykos. It's just a solid card that we can just mill cards into the graveyard. And we just want to find that kristya as soon as possible, and milling it into the grave is going to be really strong. And Card Trooper is just a solid card in fairies, I think, in general. It's kind of like fallen out of favor, but I think the card's solid and it does a lot. So, especially for this list, we're going to play the one Card Trooper. For spells, not too many of them. We have one copy of Heavy Storm, of course, and then the Brain Control plus Mind Control. Brain Control and Mind Control aren't really the strongest cards in fairies, but the addition of Cyber Valley really makes these cards really, really relevant. Being able to essentially turn these cards into Cyber Valley draw with your opponent's monsters, banishing their monster and yours, it's really strong because the recruiters just give you access to the Cyber Valley. So cards are just really good, and you can also synchro away the opponent's monsters with the copies of Herald of Orange Light. They are tuners, of course, so we do have ways to kind of out their monsters, and Cyber Valley adding to the deck just makes these cards so powerful. A lot of decks played the Brain Control, but adding the Mind Control just gives you a lot more options, and just giving the fairy deck a lot more play is exactly where you want to be. So two of these sort of take opponent's control effects, and then the one's Heavy Storm. That's all for spell cards. So onto traps, we have the full 3 copies of Miraculous Descent. This is kind of like a combo card, really strong. We just want to reborn that kristya at instant speed, put it into play, and kill our opponent with it. And kristya is just really strong when you get to summon it on the opponent's turn in response to whether it be a dandelion effect, a debris activation. It could be literally anything. Teleport, Book of Life, so many cards that Mizuki, Chain to Mizuki's effect, just really strong. And we don't have 3 calls in this format, but we do have the 3 copies of Miraculous Descent. We have to work a little bit to get that kristya removed, but the payoff is immense. And this card is just solid. I mean, it's just a good card. There's a lot of ways to get fairies banished, of course, with Solar Purity Light and freed. So we're just going to run the 3 copies of Miraculous Descent, and yeah, pretty sweet. We have one copy called the Haunted, of course, because it's just the better Miraculous Descent. We can reborn monsters out of our graveyard. Really good in combination with Card Trooper, of course, but of course just reborn a kristya out of the grave is basically what we want to be doing with this. Very good card here. 2 copies of Bottomless. We still want some removal, right? Being able to remove our opponent's cards with Bottomless, as well as DD Warrior Lady and Ryko, of course. But the Bottomlesses and the Warrior Ladies really kind of like can put a halt in opposing game plans. Actually removing creatures instead of putting them in the graveyard is very strong. So having the Bottomlesses, I do like that quite a bit. We have Solemn Judgment, just being able to set this behind a kristya once we reborned it off of our Miraculous Descent is just incredibly powerful, especially if we chain the Miraculous Descent for value onto like a card like Teleport or something. It just takes a card away from them there, and then having a kristya in play plus Solemn is just going to be game breaking. So I do like that quite a bit. Also, I like this card in combination with Soul Purity and Light. I think having Soul Purity and Light plus one other monster and Solemn is just kind of like a very hard game state for a lot of decks to break. So I do like the one Solemn there. And of course, we have Return from Different Dimension. We have so many ways to banish our fairies. We're going to reborn them and just kill our opponent with them. Really strong here. I always like this card as a value card in this deck, especially with the addition of Cyber Valley. A lot of ways to get value. Things like reborn, bring back a DD Warrior Lady and Honest and like a Cyber Valley, something like that, and then you can like crash into one of their monsters, banish the Warrior Lady, add the Honest back to hand, and then like banish the Cyber Valley like some other way, like to maybe put the Return onto the top of your deck, or to put a kristya onto the top of your deck or something along those lines. So card's really good. I think it's just obviously really broken, and a lot of cool ways to utilize it in this deck. Onto the extra deck. Pretty straightforward. We have Armory Arm, we have the Magical Android, copy of Catastor, of course. We have 6s, Goyo and Brionac. Some 7s here. We have Black Rose and Ancient Fairy. Of course, we have the Ancient Sacred Wyvern. Card's really busted. We can make it, so we're going to play it. Card just OTKs the opponents. Very, very strong here. We have, for some 8s, we have Stardust Dragon and Colossal Fighter, of course. The generic ones, we have Red Dragon Archfiend as well as Thought Whirler Archfiend. And then we're electing to play the Air Knight Parshath because we can. It's really situational, but when it does come up, it's very powerful. And we have a 9 in Mistworm and a Chimera Tech for the Cyber Dragons on the sideboard, of course. Onto the sideboard, 2 copies of DD Crow and 2 copies of Cyber Dragon. I love these cards, guys. I like to play them a lot in our decks. I'm elected only for 2 DD Crows for the addition of another card that we will get to in just a second. But 2 Cyber Dragons also very good in this deck, especially with like Soul, Purity, and Light. We can just really make some really big game pushes that can be protected from Gorz and Tragodia with the addition of Kristya into our board. So 2 copies of My Body's a Shield. This card's really solid in this type of deck because we're going to be wanting to summon our Kristya early and often, and being able to protect it is very strong. And I think in the sideboard, you know, it just gives you a little bit of play against the decks that have more removal than others. So we just want this to protect our Kristya. Even protect something like a Soul, Purity, and Light is really strong as well. Just continue the beatdown plan. So 2 of these, I like it quite a bit. We have 1 copy of MST for removal, and then I'm electing to play 1 copy of Soul Release instead of the 3rd copy of the DD Crow, because I think a lot of these games get really grindy and go long, and sometimes you can end up getting even like 2 cards rather than 1 off the DD Crow in a late game situation where the cards are kind of just piling up in the graveyard and your opponent's waiting for a real reason to like push, you know, because a lot of times they're slogging through cards like DD Warrior Lady and Ryko, and they're not really like pushing, and their graveyard kind of just builds up over time. So I like this even because even if it gets 2 cards instead like that are good out of the graveyard rather than the 1 from DD Crow, you know, it's good. And I think this deck can these fairy decks can kind of like build those like graveyards for the opponent sometimes just by like naturally making the game go long. So I do like the 1 Soul Release here. I have 2 copies of Dust Tornado, of course, just solid removal. We're going to want it at some points. We have 2 copies of Dimensional Prison just for removal. We're going to have, we can really side into like a more traditional fairy deck with this card, being able to like bring in these 4 even, like some Cyber Dragons, and just kind of be like a more traditional control deck. But yeah, I like the Deep Prison inside. 2, Pulling the Rug. Pulling the Rug strong, you know. I think it's just going to not let our opponent cast our recruiters, which is good, and I've been liking this card quite a bit recently. So 2 copies of Pulling the Rug, and then of course would not be an SSG profile without the 1 copy of Trap Dust Shoot somewhere in the main or side. Of course, in the sideboard, we just want it for going first. Our main deck is trying to just be extremely linear and just summon the Kristya, so we don't really want like a Trap Dust Shoot like going second. It's just going to kind of slow us down, so just want it in the sideboard for going first. And that's about it, guys. That is the entire deck. Let me know what you guys thought about the deck in the comment section below. I love this card, Miraculous Descent. It's one of my favorite ultis from back in the day, and it's just a pretty sweet card. It does some nasty things with Kristya. Reborning Kristya at instant speed is just inherently powerful, and it's just something that like is pretty awesome. Of course, we did it in other formats with Call of the Haunted, but in this format, we're doing it with Kristya and Miraculous Descent. So that is about it, guys. Without further ado, this is Dan V from SSG signing out.